The Marvelous Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 17. The Astonishing Flight of the Gump. When the adventurers reassembled upon the roof, it was found that a remarkably queer assortment of articles had been selected by the various members of the party. No one seemed to have a very clear idea of what was required, but all had brought something. The Woggle-Bug had taken from its position over the mantelpiece in the great hallway the head of a Gump, which was adorned with wide-spreading antlers, and this, with great care and greater difficulty, the insect had carried up the stairs to the roof. This Gump resembled an elk's head, only the nose turned upward in a very saucy manner, and there were whiskers upon its chin, like those of a billy-goat. Why the Woggle-Bug selected this article he could not have explained, except that it had aroused his curiosity. Tip, with the aid of the Sawhorse, had brought a large upholstered sofa to the roof. It was an old-fashioned piece of furniture, with high back and ends, and it was so heavy that even by resting the greatest weight upon the back of the Sawhorse, the boy found himself out of breath when at last the clumsy sofa was dumped upon the roof. The Pumpkinhead had brought a broom, which was the first thing he saw. The Scarecrow arrived with a coil of clotheslines and ropes, which he had taken from the courtyard, and in his trip up the stairs he had become so entangled in the loose ends of the ropes that both he and his burden tumbled in a heap upon the roof, and might have rolled off if Tip had not rescued him. The Tin Woodman appeared last. He also had been to the courtyard, where he had cut 4 great spreading leaves from a huge palm tree that was the pride of all the inhabitants of the Emerald City. "My dear Nick!" exclaimed the Scarecrow, seeing what his friend had done. "You have been guilty of the greatest crime any person can commit in the Emerald City. If I remember rightly, the penalty for chopping leaves from the royal palm tree is to be killed 7 times and afterward imprisoned for life." "It cannot be helped now," answered the Tin Woodman, throwing down the big leaves upon the roof. "But it may be one more reason why it is necessary for us to escape. And now let us see what you have found for me to work with." Many were the doubtful looks cast upon the heap of miscellaneous material that now cluttered the roof, and finally the Scarecrow shook his head and remarked, "Well, if friend Nick can manufacture from this mess of rubbish a thing that will fly through the air and carry us to safety, then I will acknowledge him to be a better mechanic than I suspected." But the Tin Woodman seemed at first by no means sure of his powers, and only after polishing his forehead vigorously with the chamois leather did he resolve to undertake the task. "The first thing required for the machine," said he, "is a body big enough to carry the entire party. This sofa is the biggest thing we have, and might be used for a body, but should the machine ever tip sideways, we would all slide off and fall to the ground." "Why not use 2 sofas?" asked Tip. "There's another one just like this downstairs." "That is a very sensible suggestion," exclaimed the Tin Woodman. "You must fetch the other sofa at once." So Tip and the Sawhorse managed, with much labor, to get the second sofa to the roof, and when the 2 were placed together, edge to edge, the backs and ends formed a protecting rampart all around the seats. "Excellent!" cried the Scarecrow. "We can ride within this snug nest quite at our ease." The 2 sofas were now bound firmly together with ropes and clotheslines, and then Nick Chopper fastened the Gump's head to one end. "That will show which is the front end of the thing," said he, greatly pleased with the idea. "And really, if you examine it critically, the Gump looks very well as a figurehead." These great palm leaves, for which I have endangered my life 7 times, must serve us as wings." "Are they strong enough?" asked the boy. "They are as strong as anything we can get," answered the Woodman, "and although they are not in proportion to the thing's body, we are not in a position to be very particular." So he fastened the palm leaves to the sofa, 2 on each side. Said the Woggle-Bug with considerable admiration,
"The thing is now complete and only needs to be brought to life."
"Stop a moment," exclaimed Jack. "Are you not going to use my broom?" "What for?" asked the Scarecrow. "Why, it can be fastened to the back end for a tail," answered the Pumpkinhead. "Surely you would not call the thing complete without a tail?" Said the Tin Woodman. "I do not see the use of a tail. We are not trying to copy a beast or a fish or a bird. All we ask of the thing is to carry us through the air. Perhaps, after the thing is brought to life, it can use a tail to steer with," suggested the Scarecrow. "For if it flies through the air, it will not be unlike a bird, and I've noticed that all birds have tails which they use for a rudder while flying." "Very well," answered Nick. "The broom shall be used for a tail," and he fastened it firmly to the back end of the sofa body. Tip took the pepper box from his pocket. "The thing looks very big," said he anxiously, "and I am not sure there is enough powder left to bring all of it to life, but I'll make it go as far as possible." "Put most on the wings," said Nick Chopper, "for they must be made as strong as possible."
"And don't forget the head,"
exclaimed the Woggle-Bug. "Or the tail," added Jack Pumpkinhead. "Do be quiet," said Tip nervously. "You must give me a chance to work the magic charm in the proper manner." Very carefully he began sprinkling the thing with the precious powder. Each of the 4 wings was first lightly covered with a layer, then the sofas were sprinkled, and the broom given a slight coating.
The head, the head! Don't, I beg of you, forget the head!"
cried the Woggle-Bug excitedly. "There's only a little of the powder left," announced Tip, looking within the box, "and it seems to me it is more important to bring the legs of the sofa to life than the head." "Not so," decided the Scarecrow. "Everything must have a head to direct it, and since this creature is to fly and not walk, it is really unimportant whether its legs are alive or not." So Tip abided by this decision and sprinkled the Gump's head with the remainder of the powder. "Now," said he, "keep silence while I work the charm." Having heard old Mombi pronounce the magic words, and having also succeeded in bringing the Sawhorse to life, Tip did not hesitate an instant in speaking the 3 cabalistic words, each accompanied by the peculiar gestures of the hands. It was a grave and impressive ceremony. As he finished the incantation, the thing shuddered throughout its huge bulk. The Gump gave the screeching cry that is familiar to those animals, and then the 4 wings began flopping furiously. Tip managed to grasp a chimney, else he would have been blown off the roof by the terrible breeze raised by the wings. The Scarecrow, being light in weight, was caught up bodily and thrown through the air until Tip luckily seized him by one leg and held him fast. The Woggle-Bug lay flat upon the roof, and so escaped harm, and the Tin Woodman, whose weight of 10 anchored him firmly, threw both arms around Jack Pumpkinhead and managed to save him. The Sawhorse toppled over upon his back and lay with his legs waving helplessly above him. And now, while all were struggling to recover themselves, the thing rose slowly from the roof and mounted into the air. "Hey, come back!" cried Tip in a frightened voice, as he clung to the chimney with one hand and the Scarecrow with the other. "Come back at once, I command you." It was now that the wisdom of the Scarecrow in bringing the head of the thing to life instead of the legs was proved beyond a doubt, for the Gump, already high in the air, turned its head at Tip's command and gradually circled around until it could view the roof of the palace. "Come back!" shouted the boy again, and the Gump obeyed, slowly and gracefully, waving its four wings in the air until the thing had settled once more upon the roof and become still. Chapter 18. In the Jackdaw's Nest. "This," said the Gump in a squeaky voice not at all proportioned to the size of its great body, "is the most novel experience I ever heard of. The last thing I remember distinctly is walking through the forest and hearing a loud noise. Something probably killed me then, and it certainly ought to have been the end of me, yet here I am alive again, with four monstrous wings, and a body which I venture to say would make any respectable animal or fowl weep with shame to own. What does it all mean? Am I a Gump, or am I a Juggernaut?" The creature, as it spoke, wiggled its chin whiskers in a very comical manner. "You're just a thing," answered Tip, "with the Gump's head on it, and we have made you and brought you to life so that you may carry us through the air wherever we wish to go." "Very good," said the thing. "As I am not a Gump, I cannot have a Gump's pride or independent spirit, so I may as well become your servant as anything else. My only satisfaction is that I do not seem to have a very strong constitution, and am not likely to live long in a state of slavery." "Don't say that, I beg of you," cried the Tin Woodman, whose excellent heart was strongly affected by this sad speech. "Are you not feeling well today?" "Oh, as for that," returned the Gump, "it is my first day of existence, so I cannot judge whether I am feeling well or ill," and it waved its broom tail to and fro in a pensive manner. "Come, come," said the Scarecrow kindly, "do try to be more cheerful and take life as you find it. We shall be kind masters, and will strive to render your existence as pleasant as possible. Are you willing to carry us through the air wherever we wish to go?" "Certainly," answered the Gump. "I greatly prefer to navigate the air, for should I travel on the earth and meet with one of my own species, my embarrassment would be something awful." "I can appreciate that," said the Tin Woodman sympathetically. "And yet," continued the thing, "when I carefully look you over, my masters, none of you seems to be constructed much more artistically than I am."
"Appearances are deceitful,"
said the Woggle-Bug earnestly.
"I am both highly magnified and thoroughly educated."
"Indeed," murmured the Gump indifferently. "And my brains are considered remarkably rare specimens," added the Scarecrow proudly. "How strange," remarked the Gump. "Although I am of tin," said the Woodman, "I own a heart altogether the warmest and most admirable in the whole world." "I'm delighted to hear it," replied the Gump with a slight cough. "My smile," said Jack Pumpkinhead, "is worthy your best attention. It is always the same."
"Semper idem,"
explained the Woggle-Bug pompously, and the Gump turned to stare at him. "And I," declared the Sawhorse, filling in an awkward pause, "am only remarkable because I can't help it." "I am proud indeed to meet with such exceptional masters," said the Gump in a careless tone. "If I could but secure so complete an introduction to myself, I would be more than satisfied." "That will come in time," remarked the Scarecrow. "To know thyself is considered quite an accomplishment, which it has taken us, who are your elders, months to perfect. But now," he added, turning to the others, "let us get aboard and start our journey." "Where shall we go?" asked Tip, as he clambered to a seat on the sofas and assisted the Pumpkinhead to follow him. "In the South Country rules a very delightful queen called Glinda the Good, who I am sure will gladly receive us," said the Scarecrow, getting into the thing clumsily. "Let us go to her and ask her advice." "That is cleverly thought of," declared Nick Chopper, giving the Woggle-Bug a boost, and then toppling the Sawhorse into the rear end of the cushioned seats. "I know Glinda the Good, and believe me, she will prove a friend indeed." "Are we all ready?" asked the boy. "Yes," announced the Tin Woodman, seating himself beside the Scarecrow. "Then," said Tip, addressing the Gump, "be kind enough to fly with us to the southward, and do not go higher than to escape the houses and trees, for it makes me dizzy to be up so far." "All right," answered the Gump briefly. It flopped its 4 huge wings and rose slowly into the air, and then, while our little band of adventurers clung to the backs and sides of the sofas for support, the Gump turned toward the south and soared swiftly and majestically away.
"The scenic effect from this altitude is marvelous,"
commented the educated Woggle-Bug as they rode along. "Never mind the scenery," said the Scarecrow. "Hold on tight, or you may get a tumble. The thing seems to rock badly." "It will be dark soon," said Tip, observing that the sun was low on the horizon. "Perhaps we should have waited until morning. I wonder if the Gump can fly in the night." "I've been wondering that myself," returned the Gump quietly. "You see, this is a new experience to me. I used to have legs that carried me swiftly over the ground, but now my legs feel as if they were asleep." "They are," said Tip. "We didn't bring 'em to life." "You're expected to fly," explained the Scarecrow, "not to walk."
"We can walk ourselves,"
said the Woggle-Bug. "I begin to understand what is required of me," remarked the Gump, "so I will do my best to please you." And he flew on for a time in silence. Presently Jack Pumpkinhead became uneasy. "I wonder if riding through the air is liable to spoil pumpkins," he said.
"Not unless you carelessly drop your head over the side,"
answered the Woggle-Bug.
"In that event, your head would no longer be a pumpkin, for it would become a squash."
"Have I not asked you to restrain those unfeeling jokes?" demanded Tip, looking at the Woggle-Bug with a severe expression.
"You have, and I've restrained a good many of them,"
replied the insect.
"but there are opportunities for so many excellent puns in our language that, to an educated person like myself, the temptation to express them is almost irresistible."
"People with more or less education discovered those puns centuries ago," said Tip.
"Are you sure?"
asked the Woggle-Bug with a startled look. "Of course I am," answered the boy. "An educated Woggle-Bug may be a new thing, but a Woggle-Bug education is as old as the hills, judging from the display you make of it." The insect seemed much impressed by this remark, and for a time maintained a meek silence. The Scarecrow, in shifting his seat, saw upon the cushions the pepper box which Tip had cast aside, and began to examine it. "Throw it overboard," said the boy. "It's quite empty now, and there's no use keeping it." "Is it really empty?" asked the Scarecrow, looking curiously into the box. "Of course it is," answered Tip. "I shook out every grain of the powder." "Then the box has 2 bottoms," announced the Scarecrow, "for the bottom on the inside is fully an inch away from the bottom on the outside." "Let me see," said the Tin Woodman, taking the box from his friend. "Yes," he declared after looking it over, "the thing certainly has a false bottom. Now I wonder what that is for." "Can't you get it apart and find out?" inquired Tip, now quite interested in the mystery. "Why, yes, the lower bottom unscrews," said the Tin Woodman. "My fingers are rather stiff. Please see if you can open it." He handed the pepper box to Tip, who had no difficulty in unscrewing the bottom, and in the cavity below were 3 silver pills, with a carefully folded paper lying underneath them. This paper the boy proceeded to unfold, taking care not to spill the pills, and found several lines clearly written in red ink. "Read it aloud," said the Scarecrow, so Tip read as follows: "Dr. Nickedick's Celebrated Wishing Pills. Directions for use. Swallow 1 pill, count 17 by twos, then make a wish. The wish will immediately be granted. Caution: keep in a dry and dark place." "Why, this is a very valuable discovery!" cried the Scarecrow. "It is indeed," replied Tip gravely. "These pills may be of great use to us. I wonder if old Mombi knew they were in the bottom of the pepper box. I remember hearing her say that she got the powder of life from this same Nicky Dick." "He must be a powerful sorcerer," exclaimed the Tin Woodman, "and since the powder proved a success, we ought to have confidence in the pills." "But how," asked the Scarecrow, "can anyone count 17 by twos? 17 is an odd number." "That is true," replied Tip, greatly disappointed. "No one can possibly count 17 by twos." "Then the pills are of no use to us," wailed the Pumpkinhead. "And this fact overwhelms me with grief, for I had intended wishing that my head would never spoil." "Nonsense," said the Scarecrow sharply. "If we could use the pills at all, we would make far better wishes than that." "I do not see how anything could be better," protested poor Jack. "If you were liable to spoil at any time, you could understand my anxiety." "For my part," said the Tin Woodman, "I sympathize with you in every respect. But since we cannot count 17 by twos, sympathy is all you are liable to get." By this time it had become quite dark, and the voyagers found above them a cloudy sky through which the rays of the moon could not penetrate. The Gump flew steadily on, and for some reason the huge sofa body rocked more and more dizzily every hour. The Woggle-Bug declared he was seasick, and Tip was also pale and somewhat distressed. But the others clung to the backs of the sofa and did not seem to mind the motion as long as they were not tipped out. Darker and darker grew the night, and on sped the Gump through the black heavens. The travelers could not even see one another, and an oppressive silence settled down upon them. After a long time, Tip, who had been thinking deeply, spoke. "How are we to know when we come to the palace of Glinda the Good?" he asked. "It's a long way to Glinda's palace," answered the Tin Woodman. "I've traveled it." "But how are we to know how fast the Gump is flying?" persisted the boy. "We cannot see a single thing down on the earth, and before morning we may be far beyond the place we want to reach." "That is all true enough," the Scarecrow replied a little uneasily, "but I do not see how we can stop just now, for we might alight in a river or on the top of a steeple, and that would be a great disaster." So they permitted the Gump to fly on, with regular flops of its great wings, and waited patiently for morning. Then Tip's fears were proven to be well founded, for with the first streaks of gray dawn they looked over the sides of the sofas and discovered rolling plains dotted with queer villages, where the houses, instead of being dome-shaped, as they all are in the Land of Oz, had slanting roofs that rose to a peak in the center. Odd-looking animals were also moving about on the open plains, and the country was unfamiliar to both the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow, who had formerly visited Glinda the Good's domain and knew it well. "We are lost," said the Scarecrow dolefully. "The Gump must have carried us entirely out of the Land of Oz, and over the sandy desert and into the terrible outside world that Dorothy told us about." "We must get back," exclaimed the Tin Woodman earnestly. "We must get back as soon as possible." "Turn around!" cried Tip to the Gump. "Turn as quickly as you can." "If I do, I shall upset," answered the Gump. "I'm not at all used to flying, and the best plan would be for me to alight in some place, and then I can turn around and take a fresh start." Just then, however, there seemed to be no stopping place that would answer their purpose. They flew over a village so big that the Woggle-Bug declared it was a city, and then they came to a range of high mountains with many deep gorges and steep cliffs showing plainly. "Now is our chance to stop," said the boy, finding they were very close to the mountain tops. Then he turned to the Gump and commanded, "Stop at the first level place you see." "Very well," answered the Gump, and settled down upon a table of rock that stood between two cliffs. But, not being experienced in such matters, the Gump did not judge his speed correctly, and instead of coming to a stop upon the flat rock, he missed it by half the width of his body, breaking off both his right wings against the sharp edge of the rock, and then tumbling over and over down the cliff. Our friends held on to the sofa as long as they could, but when the Gump caught on a projecting rock, the thing stopped suddenly, bottom side up, and all were immediately dumped out. By good fortune they fell only a few feet, for underneath them was a monster nest, built by a colony of jackdaws in a hollow ledge of rock, so none of them, not even the Pumpkinhead, was injured by the fall. For Jack found his precious head resting on the soft breast of the Scarecrow, which made an excellent cushion, and Tip fell on a mass of leaves and papers, which saved him from injury. The Woggle-Bug had bumped his round head against the Sawhorse, but without causing him more than a moment's inconvenience. The Tin Woodman was at first much alarmed, but finding he had escaped without even a scratch upon his beautiful nickel plate, he at once regained his accustomed cheerfulness and turned to address his comrades. "Our journey has ended rather suddenly," said he, "and we cannot justly blame our friend the Gump for our accident, because he did the best he could under the circumstances. But how we are ever to escape from this nest, I must leave to someone with better brains than I possess." Here he gazed at the Scarecrow, who crawled to the edge of the nest and looked over. Below them was a sheer precipice, several hundred feet in depth. Above them was a smooth cliff, unbroken save by the point of rock where the wrecked body of the Gump still hung suspended from the end of one of the sofas. There really seemed to be no means of escape, and as they realized their helpless plight, the little band of adventurers gave way to their bewilderment.
"This is a worse prison than the palace,"
sadly remarked the Woggle-Bug. "I wish we had stayed there," moaned Jack. "I'm afraid the mountain air isn't good for pumpkins." "It won't be when the jackdaws come back," growled the Sawhorse, which lay waving its legs in a vain endeavor to get upon its feet again. "Jackdaws are especially fond of pumpkins." "Do you think the birds will come here?" asked Jack, much distressed. "Of course they will," said Tip, "for this is their nest. And there must be hundreds of them," he continued, "for see what a lot of things they have brought here." Indeed, the nest was half filled with a most curious collection of small articles for which the birds could have no use, but which the thieving jackdaws had stolen during many years from the homes of men. And as the nest was safely hidden where no human being could reach it, this lost property would never be recovered. The Woggle-Bug, searching among the rubbish, for the jackdaws stole useless things as well as valuable ones, turned up with his foot a beautiful diamond necklace. This was so greatly admired by the Tin Woodman that the Woggle-Bug presented it to him with a graceful speech, after which the Woodman hung it around his neck with much pride, rejoicing exceedingly when the big diamonds glittered in the sun's rays. But now they heard a great jabbering and flopping of wings, and as the sound grew nearer to them, Tip exclaimed, "The jackdaws are coming, and if they find us here they will surely kill us in their anger."
"I was afraid of this,"
moaned the Pumpkinhead. "My time has come."
"And mine also,"
said the Woggle-Bug,
"for jackdaws are the greatest enemies of my race."
The others were not at all afraid, but the Scarecrow at once decided to save those of the party who were liable to be injured by the angry birds. So he commanded Tip to take off Jack's head and lie down with it in the bottom of the nest, and when this was done, he ordered the Woggle-Bug to lie beside Tip. Nick Chopper, who knew from past experience just what to do, then took the Scarecrow to pieces, all except his head, and scattered the straw over Tip and the Woggle-Bug, completely covering their bodies. Hardly had this been accomplished when the flock of jackdaws reached them. Perceiving the intruders in their nest, the birds flew down upon them with screams of rage. Chapter 19. Dr. Nicky Dick's Famous Wishing Pills. The Tin Woodman was usually a peaceful man, but when occasion required, he could fight as fiercely as a Roman gladiator. So when the jackdaws nearly knocked him down in their rush of wings, and their sharp beaks and claws threatened to damage his brilliant plating, the Woodman picked up his axe and made it whirl swiftly around his head. But although many were beaten off in this way, the birds were so numerous and so brave that they continued the attack as furiously as before. Some of them pecked at the eyes of the Gump, which hung over the nest in a helpless condition, but the Gump's eyes were of glass and could not be injured. Others of the jackdaws rushed at the Sawhorse, but that animal, being still upon his back, kicked out so viciously with his wooden legs that he beat off as many assailants as did the Woodman's axe. Finding themselves thus opposed, the birds fell upon the Scarecrow's straw, which lay at the center of the nest, covering Tip and the Woggle-Bug and Jack's pumpkin head, and began tearing it away and flying off with it, only to let it drop, straw by straw, into the great gulf beneath. The Scarecrow's head, noting with dismay this wanton destruction of his interior, cried out to the Tin Woodman to save him, and that good friend responded with renewed energy. His axe fairly flashed among the jackdaws, and fortunately the Gump began wildly waving the two wings remaining on the left side of its body. The flutter of these great wings filled the jackdaws with terror, and when the Gump, by its exertions, freed itself from the peg of rock on which it hung and sank flopping into the nest, the alarm of the birds knew no bounds, and they fled screaming over the mountains. When the last foe had disappeared, Tip crawled from under the sofas and assisted the Woggle-Bug to follow him. "We are saved!" shouted the boy delightedly.
"We are indeed,"
responded the educated insect, fairly hugging the stiff head of the Gump in his joy.
"and we owe it all to the flopping of the thing and the good axe of the Woodman."
"If I am saved, get me out of here," called Jack, whose head was still beneath the sofas, and Tip managed to roll the pumpkin out and place it upon its neck again. He also set the Sawhorse upright and said to it, "We owe you many thanks for the gallant fight you made." "I really think we have escaped very nicely," remarked the Tin Woodman in a tone of pride. "Not so!" exclaimed a hollow voice. At this, they all turned in surprise to look at the Scarecrow's head, which lay at the back of the nest. "I am completely ruined," declared the Scarecrow as he noted their astonishment. "For where is the straw that stuffs my body?" The awful question startled them all. They gazed around the nest with horror, for not a vestige of straw remained. The jackdaws had stolen it to the last wisp, and flung it all into the chasm that yawned for hundreds of feet below the nest. "My poor, poor friend," said the Tin Woodman, taking up the Scarecrow's head and caressing it tenderly. "Whoever could imagine you would come to this untimely end?" "I did it to save my friends," returned the head, "and I am glad that I perished in so noble and unselfish a manner."
"But why are you all so despondent?"
inquired the Woggle-Bug.
"The Scarecrow's clothing is still safe?"
"Yes," answered the Tin Woodman, "but our friend's clothes are useless without stuffing." "Why not stuff him with money?" asked Tip. "Money!" they all cried in an amazed chorus. "To be sure," said the boy. "In the bottom of the nest are thousands of dollar bills, and $2 bills, and $5 bills, and tens and twenties and fifties. There are enough of them to stuff a dozen scarecrows. Why not use the money?" The Tin Woodman began to turn over the rubbish with the handle of his axe, and sure enough, what they had first thought only worthless papers were found to be bills of various denominations, which the mischievous jackdaws had for years been engaged in stealing from the villages and cities they visited. There was an immense fortune lying in that inaccessible nest, and Tip's suggestion was, with the Scarecrow's consent, quickly acted upon. They selected all the newest and cleanest bills and assorted them into various piles. The Scarecrow's left leg and boot were stuffed with $5 bills, his right leg was stuffed with $10 bills, and his body so closely filled with fifties, 100s, and 1000s that he could scarcely button his jacket with comfort.
"You are now,"
said the Woggle-Bug impressively when the task had been completed,
"the most valuable member of our party, and as you are among faithful friends, there is little danger of your being spent."
"Thank you," returned the Scarecrow gratefully. "I feel like a new man, and although at first glance I might be mistaken for a safety deposit vault, I beg you to remember that my brains are still composed of the same old material, and these are the possessions that have always made me a person to be depended upon in an emergency." "Well, the emergency is here," observed Tip, "and unless your brain helps us out of it, we shall be compelled to pass the remainder of our lives in this nest." "How about these wishing pills?" inquired the Scarecrow, taking the box from his jacket pocket. "Can't we use them to escape?" "Not unless we can count 17 by twos," answered the Tin Woodman. "But our friend the Woggle-Bug claims to be highly educated, so he ought easily to figure out how that can be done."
"It isn't a question of education,"
returned the insect.
"It's merely a question of mathematics. I've seen the professor work out lots of sums on the blackboard, and he claimed anything could be done with X's and Y's and A's and such things, by mixing them up with plenty of pluses and minuses and equals, and so forth. But he never said anything, so far as I can remember, about counting up to the odd number of 17 by the even numbers of twos." "Stop, stop!" cried the Pumpkinhead. "You're making my head ache." "And mine," added the Scarecrow.
Your mathematics seems to me like a bottle of mixed pickles. The more you fish for what you want, the less the chance you have of getting it. I am certain that if the thing can be accomplished at all, it is in a very simple manner." "Yes," said Tip. "Old Mombi couldn't use X's and minuses, for she never went to school."
"Why not start counting at half of one?"
asked the Sawhorse abruptly.
"Then anyone can count up to 17 by twos very easily."
They looked at each other in surprise, for the Sawhorse was considered the most stupid of the entire party. "You make me quite ashamed of myself," said the Scarecrow, bowing low to the Sawhorse.
"Nevertheless, the creature is right," declared the Woggle-Bug, "for twice 1/2 is 1, and if you get to 1, it is easy to count from 1 up to 17 by twos."
"I wonder I didn't think of that myself," said the Pumpkinhead. "I didn't," returned the Scarecrow. "You're no wiser than the rest of us, are you? But let us make a wish at once. Who will swallow the first pill?" "Suppose you do it," suggested Tip. "I can't," said the Scarecrow. "Why not? You've a mouth, haven't you?" asked the boy. "Yes, but my mouth is painted on, and there's no swallow connected with it," answered the Scarecrow. "In fact," he continued, looking from one to another critically, "I believe the boy and the Woggle-Bug are the only ones in our party that are able to swallow." Observing the truth of this remark, Tip said, "Then I will undertake to make the first wish. Give me one of the silver pills." This the Scarecrow tried to do, but his padded gloves were too clumsy to catch so small an object, and he held the box toward the boy, while Tip selected one of the pills and swallowed it. "Count!" cried the Scarecrow. 1/2, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, counted Tip. 13, 15, 17. "Now wish," said the Tin Woodman anxiously. But just then the boy began to suffer such fearful pains that he became alarmed. "The pill has poisoned me," he gasped. "Oh, oh, ouch, murder, fire, oh!" And here he rolled upon the bottom of the nest in such contortions that he frightened them all. "What can we do for you? Speak, I beg," entreated the Tin Woodman, tears of sympathy running down his nickel cheeks. I don't know," answered Tip. "Oh, oh, I wish I'd never swallowed that pill." Then at once the pain stopped, and the boy rose to his feet again and found the Scarecrow looking with amazement at the end of the pepper box. "What's happened?" asked the boy, a little ashamed of his recent exhibition. "Why, the 3 pills are in the box again," said the Scarecrow.
"Of course they are," the Woggle-Bug declared. "Didn't Tip wish that he'd never swallowed one of them? Well, the wish came true, and he didn't swallow one of them, so of course they are all 3 in the box."
"That may be, but the pill gave me a dreadful pain just the same," said the boy.
"Impossible," declared the Woggle-Bug. "If you have never swallowed it, the pill cannot have given you a pain, and as your wish being granted proves you did not swallow the pill, it is also plain that you suffered no pain."
"Then it was a splendid imitation of a pain," retorted Tip angrily. "Suppose you try the next pill yourself. We've wasted one wish already." "Oh, no, we haven't," protested the Scarecrow. "Here are still 3 pills in the box, and each pill is good for a wish." "Now you're making my head ache," said Tip. "I can't understand the thing at all, but I won't take another pill, I promise you." And with this remark he retired sulkily to the back of the nest.
"Well," said the Woggle-Bug, "it remains for me to save us in my most highly magnified and thoroughly educated manner, for I seem to be the only one able and willing to make a wish. Let me have one of the pills."
He swallowed it without hesitation, and they all stood admiring his courage, while the insect counted 17 by twos in the same way that Tip had done. And for some reason, perhaps because woggle-bugs have stronger stomachs than boys, the silver pellet caused it no pain whatever.
"I wish the Gump's broken wings mended and as good as new,"
said the woggle-bug in a slow, impressive voice. All turned to look at the thing, and so quickly had the wish been granted that the Gump lay before them in perfect repair, and as well able to fly through the air as when it had first been brought to life on the roof of the palace. Chapter 20. The Scarecrow Appeals to Glinda the Good. "Hooray!" shouted the Scarecrow gaily. "We can now leave this miserable jackdaw's nest whenever we please." "But it is nearly dark," said the Tin Woodman, "and unless we wait until morning to make our flight, we may get into more trouble. I don't like these night trips, for one never knows what will happen." So it was decided to wait until daylight, and the adventurers amused themselves in the twilight by searching the jackdaw's nest for treasures. The Woggle-Bug found 2 handsome bracelets of wrought gold, which fitted his slender arms very well. The Scarecrow took a fancy for rings, of which there were many in the nest. Before long he had fitted a ring to each finger of his padded gloves, and not being content with that display, he added one more to each thumb. As he carefully chose these rings set with sparkling stones, such as rubies, amethysts, and sapphires, the Scarecrow's hands now presented a most brilliant appearance. "This nest would be a picnic for Queen Ginger," he said musingly, "for as nearly as I can make out, she and her girls conquered me merely to rob my city of its emeralds." The Tin Woodman was content with his diamond necklace, and refused to accept any additional decorations, but Tip secured a fine gold watch, which was attached to a heavy fob, and placed in his pocket with much pride. He also pinned several jeweled brooches to Jack Pumpkinhead's red waistcoat, and attached a lorgnette by means of a fine chain to the neck of the Sawhorse. "It's very pretty," said the creature, regarding the lorgnette approvingly, "but what is it for?" None of them could answer that question, however, so the Sawhorse decided it was some rare decoration, and became very proud of it. That none of the party might be slighted, they ended by placing several large seal rings upon the points of the Gump's antlers, although that odd personage seemed by no means gratified by the attention. Darkness soon fell upon them, and Tip and the Woggle-Bug went to sleep, while the others sat down to wait patiently for the day. Next morning they had cause to congratulate themselves upon the useful condition of the Gump, for with daylight a great flock of jackdaws approached to engage in one more battle for the possession of the nest. But our adventurers did not wait for the assault. They tumbled into the cushioned seats of the sofas as quickly as possible, and Tip gave the word to the Gump to start. At once it rose into the air, the great wings flapping strongly and with regular motions, and in a few moments they were so far from the nest that the chattering jackdaws took possession without any attempt of pursuit. The thing flew due north, going in the same direction from whence it had come. At least that was the Scarecrow's opinion, and the others agreed that the Scarecrow was the best judge of direction. After passing over several cities and villages, the Gump carried them high above a broad plain, where houses became more and more scattered, until they disappeared altogether. Next came the wide sandy desert, separating the rest of the world from the land of Oz, and before noon they saw the dome-shaped houses that proved they were once more within the borders of their native land. "But the houses and fences are blue," said the Tin Woodman, "and that indicates we are in the land of the Munchkins, and therefore a long distance from Glinda the Good." "What shall we do?" asked the boy, turning to their guide. "I don't know," replied the Scarecrow, frankly. "If we were at the Emerald City, we could then move directly southward, and so reach our destination. But we dare not go to the Emerald City, and the Gump is probably carrying us further in the wrong direction with every flop of its wings." "Then the Woggle Bug must swallow another pill," said Tip decidedly, "and wish us headed in the right direction."
"Very well," returned the highly magnified one. "I'm willing."
But when the Scarecrow searched in his pocket for the pepper box containing the 2 silver wishing pills, it was not to be found. Filled with anxiety, the voyagers hunted throughout every inch of the thing for the precious box, but it had disappeared entirely. And still the Gump flew onward, carrying them they knew not where. "I must have left the pepper box in the jackdaw's nest," said the Scarecrow at length. "It is a great misfortune," the Tin Woodman declared, "but we are no worse off than before we discovered the wishing pills." "We're better off," replied Tip, "for the one pill we used has enabled us to escape from that horrible nest. Yet the loss of the other 2 is serious, and I deserve a good scolding for my carelessness," the Scarecrow rejoined penitently. "For in such an unusual party as this, accidents are liable to happen any moment, and even now we may be approaching a new danger." No one dared contradict this, and a dismal silence ensued. The Gump flew steadily on. Suddenly Tip uttered an exclamation of surprise. "We must have reached the South Country!" he cried, "for below us everything is red." Immediately they all leaned over the backs of the sofas to look, all except Jack, who was too careful of his pumpkin head to risk it slipping off his neck. Sure enough, the red houses and fences and trees indicated they were within the domain of Glinda the Good, and presently, as they glided rapidly on, the Tin Woodman recognized the roads and buildings they passed, and altered slightly the flight of the Gump so that they might reach the palace of the celebrated sorceress. "Good!" cried the Scarecrow delightedly. "We do not need the lost wishing pills now, for we have arrived at our destination." Gradually the thing sank lower and nearer to the ground, until at length it came to rest within the beautiful gardens of Glinda, settling upon a velvety green lawn close by a fountain which sent sprays of flashing gems instead of water high into the air, whence they fell with a soft tinkling sound into the carved marble basin placed to receive them. Everything was very gorgeous in Glinda's gardens, and while our voyagers gazed about with admiring eyes, a company of soldiers silently appeared and surrounded them. But these soldiers of the great sorceress were entirely different from those of Ginger's army of revolt, although they were likewise girls. For Glinda's soldiers wore neat uniforms and bore swords and spears, and they marched with a skill and precision that proved them well trained in the arts of war. The captain commanding this troop, which was Glinda's private bodyguard, recognized the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman at once, and greeted them with respectful salutations. "Good day," said the Scarecrow, gallantly removing his hat, while the Woodman gave a soldierly salute. "We have come to request an audience with your fair ruler." "Glinda is now within her palace awaiting you," returned the captain, "for she saw you coming long before you arrived." "That is strange," said Tip, wondering. "Not at all," answered the Scarecrow. for Glinda the Good is a mighty sorceress, and nothing that goes on in the Land of Oz escapes her notice. I suppose she knows why we came as well as we do ourselves." "Then what was the use of our coming?" asked Jack stupidly. "To prove you are a pumpkinhead," retorted the Scarecrow. "But if the sorceress expects us, we must not keep her waiting." So they all clambered out of the sofas and followed the captain toward the palace, even the Sawhorse taking his place in the queer procession. Upon her throne of finely wrought gold sat Glinda, and she could scarcely repress a smile as her peculiar visitors entered and bowed before her. Both the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman she knew and liked, but the awkward Pumpkinhead and highly magnified Woggle-Bug were creatures she had never seen before, and they seemed even more curious than the others. As for the Sawhorse, he looked to be nothing more than an animated chunk of wood, and he bowed so stiffly that his head bumped against the floor, causing a ripple of laughter among the soldiers, in which Glinda frankly joined. "I beg to announce to your glorious Highness," began the Scarecrow in a solemn voice, "that my Emerald City has been overrun by a crowd of impudent girls with knitting needles, who have enslaved all the men, robbed the streets and public buildings of all their emerald jewels, and usurped my throne." "I know it," said Glinda. "They also threatened to destroy me as well as all the good friends and allies you see before you," continued the Scarecrow. "And had we not managed to escape their clutches, our days would long since have ended." "I know it," repeated Glinda. "Therefore I have come to beg your assistance," resumed the Scarecrow, "for I believe that you are always glad to succor the unfortunate and oppressed." "That is true," replied the sorceress slowly, "but the Emerald City is now ruled by General Ginger, who has caused herself to be proclaimed queen. What right have I to oppose her?" "Why, she stole the throne from me," said the Scarecrow. "And how came you to possess the throne?" asked Glinda. "I got it from the Wizard of Oz, and by the choice of the people," returned the Scarecrow, uneasy at such questioning. "And where did the Wizard get it?" she continued gravely. "I am told he took it from Pastoria, the former king," said the Scarecrow, becoming confused under the intent look of the sorceress. "Then," declared Glinda, "the throne of the Emerald City belongs neither to you nor to Ginger, but to this Pastoria from whom the Wizard usurped it." "That is true," acknowledged the Scarecrow humbly. "But Pastoria is now dead and gone, and someone must rule in his place. Pastoria had a daughter, who is the rightful heir to the throne of the Emerald City. Did you know that?" questioned the sorceress. "No," replied the Scarecrow, "but if the girl still lives, I will not stand in her way. It will satisfy me as well to have Ginger turned out as an impostor as to regain the throne myself. In fact, it isn't much fun to be king, especially if one has good brains. I have known for some time that I am fitted to occupy a far more exalted position. But where is the girl who owns the throne, and what is her name?" "Her name is Ozma," answered Glinda. "But where she is I have tried in vain to discover. For the Wizard of Oz, when he stole the throne from Ozma's father, hid the girl in some secret place, and by means of a magical trick with which I am not familiar he also managed to prevent her being discovered, even by so experienced a sorceress as myself."
"That is strange,"
interrupted the Woggle-Bug pompously.
"I have been informed that the wonderful Wizard of Oz was nothing more than a humbug."
"Nonsense!" exclaimed the Scarecrow, much provoked by this speech. "Didn't he give me a wonderful set of brains?" "There's no humbug about my heart," announced the Tin Woodman, glaring indignantly at the Woggle-Bug.
"Perhaps I was misinformed,"
stammered the insect, shrinking back.
I never knew the wizard personally.
Well, we did, retorted the Scarecrow, and he was a very great wizard, I assure you. It is true he was guilty of some slight impostures, but unless he was a great wizard, how, let me ask, could he have hidden this girl Ozma so securely that no one can find her?
I give it up,
Replied the Woggle-Bug meekly. That is the most sensible speech you've made, said the Tin Woodman. I must really make another effort to discover where this girl is hidden, resumed the sorceress thoughtfully. I have in my library a book in which is inscribed every action of the wizard while he was in our land of Oz, or at least every action that could be observed by my spies. This book I will read carefully tonight, and try to single out the acts that may guide us in discovering the lost Ozma. In the meantime, pray amuse yourselves in my palace, and command my servants as if they were your own. I will grant you another audience tomorrow." With this gracious speech, Glinda dismissed the adventurers, and they wandered away through the beautiful gardens, where they passed several hours, enjoying all the delightful things with which the Queen of the Southland had surrounded her royal palace. On the following morning they again appeared before Glinda, who said to them, "I have searched carefully through the records of the wizard's actions, and among them I can find but 3 that appear to have been suspicious. He ate beans with a knife, made 3 secret visits to old Mombi, and limped slightly on his left foot." "Ah, that last is certainly suspicious," exclaimed the Pumpkinhead. "Not necessarily," said the Scarecrow. "He may have had corns. Now, it seems to me his eating beans with a knife is more suspicious. Perhaps it is a polite custom in Omaha, from which great country the wizard originally came," suggested the Tin Woodman. "It may be," admitted the Scarecrow. "But why," asked Glinda, "did he make 3 secret visits to old Mombi?"
"Ah, why, indeed?"
echoed the Woggle-Bug impressively. "We know that the wizard taught the old woman many of his tricks of magic," continued Glinda, "and this he would not have done had she not assisted him in some way. So we may suspect with good reason that Mombi aided him to hide the girl Ozma, who was the real heir to the throne of the Emerald City, and a constant danger to the usurper. For if the people knew that she lived, they would quickly make her their queen and restore her to her rightful position." "And able argument," cried the Scarecrow. "I have no doubt that Mombi was mixed up in this wicked business. But how does that knowledge help us?" "We must find Mombi," replied Glinda, "and force her to tell us where the girl is hidden." "Mombi is now with Queen Ginger in the Emerald City," said Tip. "It was she who threw so many obstacles in our pathway, and made Ginger threaten to destroy my friends and give me back into the old witch's power." "Then," decided Glinda, "I will march with my army to the Emerald City and take Mombi prisoner. After that we can perhaps force her to tell the truth about Ozma." "She is a terrible old woman," remarked Tip, with a shudder at the thought of Mombi's black kettle, "and obstinate, too." "I am quite obstinate myself," returned the sorceress with a sweet smile, "so I do not fear Mombi in the least. Today I will make all necessary preparations, and we will march upon the Emerald City at daybreak tomorrow."